Welcome, everybody. My name is Nigel Hicks, and I'm a professional photographer based in the southwest of England. Going to be talking this evening about light in the landscape, or we might say lighting the landscape. Either will do. Really about how we make use of natural light in landscape photography. I have talked about useful light in photography before, as many of you will know, but this is specifically about landscape photography, so it's a bit more niche, a bit more specialized than the previous lighting talk. Now, of course, when it comes to landscape photography, we're completely dependent on the light that nature throws at us, and so we really have to either pick our day or really mold what we want to shoot according to the weather that is sent at us. We can't always shoot whatever we want, regardless of the lighting. Some subjects lend themselves very well to certain kinds of lighting, and other subjects prefer different kinds of lighting. And what I'm hoping to show this evening is how you can sort of work that one out, basically, and how you can break things down into different kinds of light and different angles and so on.
How fun.
So basically, in terms of the lighting angle relative to the subject, well, let me backtrack slightly. There are two ways of looking at lighting on landscape photography. Firstly, there is the angle of the light relative to the subject and the photographer. And then there is lighting, the angle of the light in terms of its height of the sun above the horizon. Obviously, that's determined by time of day and the time of year. The lighting, the angle of the light relative to the subject, of course, is basically relevant any time of the day, any time of the year. So when I talk about the angle of the sunlight relative to the subject, I'm looking at really three basic different angles. The first of all, if I can make this thing work, there we go. First of all, there is front lighting. That is with the sun shining in from behind the photographer straight onto your subject. So in this kind of situation, you end up with a nice, fairly evenly lit subject, and it's which gives you some nice record shots. You see in this particular picture taken in West Cornwall, the sun is not absolutely directly behind me. It's coming in slightly from the right because you've got some shadows here. But for the purpose of illustration, it's close enough to actually being right behind me and giving me frontal lighting. So this is probably the easiest kind of lighting to use to get sort of usable, workable, attractive pictures. It's not usually not going to be particularly moody, although as I'll show later, sometimes it can be very moody. But it is actually nevertheless a very easy way to get nicely exposed pictures using the light that's coming from behind you straight onto your subject. Then the second type is side lighting. In this instance, the sun is coming in hard from the right of the picture. You see the long shadows here on the trees. And when you have side lighting, then you have it really starts to pick up the shapes. In front lighting, you very often can't really see the shapes of your subject all that well, but when you got side lighting, it really picks up 3 dimensions. So for example, in this little chapel here, we've got sunlight on this side and then shadow on the side here. And then with the trees also, you can really see the 3-dimensional nature of the trees and the shapes with the shadows and the highlights, really setting up some nice structure in the picture. So frontal lighting, very often the picture can look quite flat because you don't see the 3-dimensional nature of the scene very well. But with side lighting, it starts to really pick out the shapes of your subjects and really gives a sense of 3 dimensions. And then finally, there's backlighting. So the camera is looking straight into the light. Now this is the hardest form of lighting really to shoot well with, but it's also the most creative and the type of lighting that will give you the most creative and most impactful kinds of pictures. Obviously, it has a number of problems because looking straight into the sunlight, you have danger of lots of flares coming into the lens, which can either in some ways can make the picture, but they can also really ruin it too. So there's a lot of challenges associated with shooting straight into the light. But as I say, it is the most creative and can end up giving you some of the best possible results. So that's front lighting, side lighting, and backlighting. And then what about flat lighting when there really is no sunlight? And there are 2 principal ways which we can do that. Firstly, there's a cloudy day, or perhaps you're shooting in the shade of a sunny day, but this one obviously is taken on a cloudy day. The lighting is nice and flat, and there's no sort of sun rays coming through to lighten up particular parts of the picture and put other areas into deep shadow. This kind of photography, or this kind of lighting, is really very applicable to photography in woodland, as we have here, because photography of woodland in sunlight is usually, not always, but usually quite tricky to pull off, because you end up, sorry, my finger's caught the wrong thing there. It very often will bright sunlight in woodland will end up putting bright highlights in certain parts of the picture and deep shadows into other parts of the picture, and you will end up with a picture that's just a mess. With nice flat lighting caused by a cloudy day, you have nice even lighting over the whole scene, and you end up with a nice view like this, where everything is nicely evenly lit, and you can really see the structural shape of the scene. Then the other kind of lighting is when the sun is below the horizon. Other kind of flat lighting, I should say, is when the sun is below the horizon, either before sunrise or after sunset. This shot is taken after sunset at dusk. It's about 30 or 40 minutes after sunset. And so the only light we're receiving now is sort of reflected light that's being reflected around in the atmosphere, bounced back down to the Earth from dust and water particles and so on up in the air. And the result of that is that the light is very blue. And that's what you typically get at dusk and at dawn as well, is a very blue light, which is what we have here. But again, as with the woodland picture, the lighting is very even. The blue coloring is just one of those things you have at dusk and dawn, and which you may or may not find attractive. But nevertheless, the light is very even and very lends itself to many different types of photography. And this is really kind of the main kinds of lighting angles: so front lighting, side lighting, backlighting, and then flat lights where there's no sunlight, either because it's cloudy or because the sun is below the horizon. You can then combine that with lighting at different times of the day and times of the year. And to introduce that, I'm going to use exactly the same view, but I'm going to backtrack a couple of hours. So this shot taken about an hour before sunset, so taken about 2.5, 2 3/4 hours or so before the previous picture. And now you can see we have quite strong side lighting. The light is quite warm because the sun is low towards the horizon. As the sun sets towards the horizon at sunset, or as it's coming up as well at sunrise, as you'll probably know, the light is rich in red colours, and so the landscape can appear very warm, very reddish, very orange. So you end up with some nice, very strong, warming colours. And when you combine that with side lighting, then you have a very impactful image, as we have here. So we've got obviously the front of these tin mine ruins on the west coast of Cornwall. One wall is brightly lit, the other wall is in shadow. That's true for both of the buildings. And then on the rocks, you've got really strong sense of three-dimensional nature here, with highlights and then shadows with the crevasses and ridges of the rocks showing up really nicely. Slowest shutter speed, just to blur out the water as well, combined with that gives us together a nice, strong atmospheric image. This, by the way, is taken at a place called Batala, which is this is you've probably seen pictures of this place many times before. It's a very well-known scene on the west coast of Cornwall. So anyway, we're going to backtrack even further now, right through to the middle of the day. And this is the kind of light that you get in the middle of the day in summer, when the sun is really quite high overhead. And it looks summery. That's what you can say about it. A lot of people will dislike it because it looks very, they will say it's not atmospheric, it's not moody. It certainly isn't atmospheric or moody in the sense of those previous couple of pictures, but it says summer. So in that sense, it is atmospheric because it elicits the sense of summer and tells you that this is summer. You can tell from the shadow created by the tree that the sun is quite high. So it's very much a middle of the day, middle of the summer kind of picture, which, as I say, appeals to some people, not to others. And it has a little bit of a cultural thing too, because if you go to other countries, people shooting, photographers in this country and in Europe generally tend to go for images where the sun is low and it's quite stormy, and because we like our brooding autumn and winter light where it's quite stormy and so on. Whereas in the Far East, they will prefer this kind of light where the sun is nice and bright and it's happy, sun is shining nicely, and it speaks of warmth and summer, and that's the kind of light that they often prefer for their photography. So go from sort of late afternoon, early evening sunlight with those mine ruins through to high midday summer sunlighting on this hillside here. And then finally, the other kind of lighting, it really is very much just really at sunset and sunrise. And this shot is taken just a minute or two before sunset on the north coast of Devon, just really showing that's just how moody it can get when you shoot into the light at this time of day. It's a really rich colours, lots of reds. It also serves to point out to me, that remind me to point out to you, I should say, that how important the use of neutral density graduated filters, or ND grads, is in landscape photography. Anybody who's ever tried to photograph a sunset will know that just how much the sun just overwhelms the camera, really, and you end up with a bright light in the sky there, and then the landscape in the foreground just goes completely black, and maybe the sky is black as well. Use an ND grad filter, quite a strong one, you have to say, and that can help lift the image. So in this shot, I use quite a strong ND grad filter, and that's lifted the land, and it's also darkened the clouds to actually make it really quite atmospheric, quite moody and almost stormy. But the land is clearly visible. So use an ND grad filter to actually help control the light and also reduce the massive contrast range. The problem with the digital sensor is it can't see the huge contrast range that the human eye can see. And when you shoot into the light like that, that really messes up the picture. Use an ND grad filter and it will reduce the contrast range of the scene to something much closer to what the digital sensor can handle. So we're going to now explore a few examples of each of the different types of lighting, in terms of frontal lighting at different times of the day, and side lighting at different times of the day, and backlighting at different times of the day, and so on, and then also flat lighting as well. So let's carry on. And now we're going to look at firstly a shot with front lighting. The sun is coming over behind me. It's actually, as with the very first picture I showed you, it's kind of coming in a little bit from the right because we've got some shadows. We do have some shape here. It's not completely flat, but it is there is more sunlight more or less coming in over my right shoulder and lighting up most of the scene frontally. So it's taken in the middle of the afternoon. This is in the tropics in the Philippines. So in the middle of the afternoon, the sun is still pretty high. So it coming up with a shot that many people say is not particularly atmospheric, not particularly moody, but it's also the kind of shot that travel publishers and travel agencies and tourism promotion boards in different countries rather love, because it shows beautiful weather, it shows sunshine, it shows heat, and which is obviously the sort of thing that they like to promote to their potential customers. So although photographers who are shooting just for the sake of photography may find this kind of picture just rather devoid of mood and atmosphere, in actual fact, it still has a very strong usage, because the mood and atmosphere it puts over is the one of summer heat, summer sunshine, and so on, and holidays. So that's, from my perspective, it is a very useful thing, of course. And then moving on, even more so with this kind of scene, taken late morning with the sun really high in the Caribbean. So the sun is very high now. Again, you might say completely devoid of atmosphere, but actually it's also very atmospheric in the sense that it is screaming tropical heat, tropical sunshine, wonderful beach, etc. So the light that you choose to shoot in is not necessarily simply what is thrown at you, but also what you might choose to use to actually put over different moods, different atmospheres, and different messages in range of pictures. Obviously, if I shoot this at sunset or at dusk, it'll be a very different mood, very different atmosphere, but nevertheless just as effective in a different way. Again, it's frontally lit. Of course, the sun is coming over behind me, although it's so high in the sky, you can hardly sort of say that it is coming from behind me, but that's basically where it is. And then a shot taken first thing in the morning, very early in the day. The sun has just risen, and it's coming straight from behind me. This is Mount Fitzroy in Patagonia, in the Argentinian part of Patagonia, and you can see this is an enormous mountain, and it must be loads of crevices and ridges and so on these rocks, but you can see hardly anything. There's a few lines there, but you really can't see very much, and that's because the sun really is shining straight onto the front of the mountain relative to where I'm standing. So it ought to be completely moodless, because it's very flat. It's completely flat, but actually it's very moody, and that's because of the red glow. And that red glow I've got because the sun has only just literally come over the horizon. Where I'm standing in the bottom of the valley, I'm still in deep shadow and freezing cold, but where the mountain is, the sun is already shining, as you can see. And one of the reasons why it's so richly red is because up in the mountains, the red light that you get first thing in the day and last thing as well is much stronger than it is at sea level. That's because of much less dust and moisture in the air at high altitude than is so down at sea level. So the red doesn't get absorbed as much. So you get these really strong reds right at sunrise and sunset. So a moody image, despite the fact that the sun is shining directly straight onto the front of the subject relative to where I'm standing, and moody because of the time of day, actually just immediately after the sun has risen. And then we come back to Britain, and another reason why shooting with the sun coming from behind you can be really useful and a really good idea. Rainbows. You have to get a rainbow, you really have to have the sun more or less frontally lighting your subject. It doesn't have to be exact, but it does more or less need to be coming from behind you. You see in this shot, the sun is kind of coming in from the left side at an angle, but it is more or less behind me, but not directly behind. You can see the shadow of this little tree here. It's coming in that way, so it's kind of cutting across the scene, but it is nevertheless sort of basically frontal lighting. And obviously, rainbows are fantastic. They're very dramatic, very ephemeral, don't last very long usually. On dark or in autumn, as this shot is, sometimes they can last a surprisingly long time, but normally they only last up to a minute, less than that usually. And there's lots of different ways to shoot. You've got to be in the right place at the right time, of course, which can be a matter of luck. Or you just sit at the right spot and wait for a shower to go through and hopefully catch something. But there's different ways to shoot it. Once you've got a rainbow down the sun, as you might say, that's with a wide angle lens, which gives you the full range of the whole rainbow, showing up the rainbow as quite a narrow band, of course, arcing right the way across your landscape. Or you use quite a strong telephoto lens, come in onto a very distant landscape feature, and you have this enormous segment of a rainbow, really just a very small segment of the rainbow, but it's absolutely enormous against this tiny landscape feature, in this case, a church. It's photographed in Iceland a couple of years ago. And using this telephoto lens, and it's really, as I say, can really home in on that rainbow and make it much larger. And as you can see from the light on the church, the sun really is almost frontally lighting that church. So it's coming almost directly from behind me and enabling that rainbow to be visible to me. Obviously, I've been standing a lot closer to that church, then this would not have worked quite so well, because what I ended up with then using a telephoto lens, I'd have got a picture of the church with a rainbow sort of behind it. In this shot, the rainbow is really the subject dominating the scene, and the church is a minor but nevertheless critical element in the composition, really illustrating sort of the massive size, or exaggerating the massive size of that rainbow. Obviously, it's an optical distortion, an optical illusion caused by the use of the telephoto lens, but nevertheless, it is really quite dramatic and quite effective. Okay, so that's all the uses I'm going to show you for sort of frontal lighting. Now I'm going to move on to some side lighting. And here we have a shot taken at Portland Bill in Dorset, shortly before sunset. The sun is way off to the right here, shining in very low. But it's lighting up really one wall of this rock, and then the other rock is in deep shadow. So it's really giving us a strong sense of 3 dimensions. And that's replicated also in the rocks here on the left here. It's got some dark shadows on the ridges and then bright highlights on those parts which are facing the sun. So it really enhances the sense of 3 dimensions in this picture, and really helps to set up the mood, create some mood and atmosphere, which further enhanced also, I think, by using a slow shutter speed to actually blur the movement of the waves, which it really gives us a sense of energy and dynamism. But the light is very much created by it being side lighting and the sun being low, those two working in combination. Now, more side lighting, I'm going to show you 2 images of the same view. Firstly, well, this is a very heavily photographed scene in Iceland. This is Mount Kirkjufels, and this is Kirkjufels Foss, or Kirkjufels Waterfall. You see pictures of this place all over the place, or anything related to photography. And obviously, related to Iceland, it's a very commonly shot view. But anyway, this is the scene photographed first thing in the morning, not immediately after sunrise, but fairly early in the morning. The sun obviously is shining from the right-hand side. Most of the mountain, which is facing sort of southwest, is in shadow, but this whole waterfall facing east is massively brightly lit. And when you've got sunlight shining on a waterfall like this, it's very hard to stop this white water burning out. And it's also quite hard to use a slow enough shutter speed to use a slow shutter speed to blur the movement of the water. But in this instance, I was able to manage it. Light levels were not that intense, despite the way it appears in this picture. And I was able to use a slow enough shutter speed to blur it, and the water is moving extremely fast, so I didn't have to use a particularly slow shutter speed. I don't have the number actually at my fingertips, but it's probably about tenths of a second to get that kind of blur. And but to avoid to avoid the water burning out, had to be quite careful. But it also took some post-photography processing as well to actually decrease the contrast range in the image to make sure that water didn't go completely white and completely burnt out. I think this area here probably has, but the water nearest us has not. So that's one atmosphere of this picture, one angle, morning shot, bright sunlight on the waterfall, the mountain mostly in shadow. If we look at the next picture, taken in evening sunlight. So now the sun is in the southwest, coming from the left of the scene, and Kirkefels is now nicely lit up by some nice warm reddish light, and the waterfall is in deep shadow. There's no sunlight shining directly on this waterfall at all. We're now in very much reflected light, so it's quite blue. I did actually decrease the amount of blue in this shot because it was so blue. It's actually too blue even for my liking. So it has been decreased in post-photography processing, but it's still quite blue. And also now, of course, because it's so dark in the shadow, no problem at all about getting a slow shutter speed to blur the movement of the water and avoid it burning out as well. Now, however, this area, as I say, is in deep shadow. This area is in bright sunlight. So the contrast range in this scene is absolutely huge, much too big for the digital sensor to handle effectively. Okay, for the human eye, I could manage it, no problem at all. But for the digital sensor, it's almost impossible, well, it was impossible to photograph this scene and get the mountain correctly exposed and the waterfall correctly exposed. So I've had to use quite a strong neutral density graduated filter, lining up the transition zone between the dark and the light areas along this ridge. So the transition line was along this ridge. So the mountain itself is also darkened. The sky is darkened, the mountain is darkened, and the waterfall here and the face of the slope of this side are all actually lightened up quite significantly because we've reduced the contrast range by quite a bit using that ND grad filter, resulting in something that the digital sensor can actually cope with and actually end up with really quite a nice moody atmospheric picture. So finally, the final shot on side lighting, this is almost backlighting, but I still class it as side lighting because the sun is coming in from the left here. It's a little bit sort of towards me as well, but more or less from the left. The sun is getting fairly low in the sky, but not massively so. And it's one of these classic shots of sun rays breaking through cloud. Now, obviously, this kind of thing, it changes all the time, every second that the composition changes. The light rays and the light shafts change all the time, especially if the clouds are moving quickly. So you have to keep on shooting and just shoot things that appear to work and then choose your favorite pictures afterwards. The other thing you need to do is actually grossly underexpose the picture as well, because the camera's light meter will tend to want to expose for the cloud and the landscape and the water, and it will expose them to a sort of a neutral gray, meaning that these shafts of light will be far too bright and won't have much contrast in them, or they won't really have much atmosphere, much mood in them. So underexpose the picture by a stop or maybe even two stops, and you end up getting a picture that really concentrates on these light rays cutting across the scene. What you end up with then, of course, is the rest of the picture is really quite dark. But that actually helps to enhance the storminess and the moodiness of the scene, which really goes quite well with this kind of shaft of light kind of scene. In actual fact, it was nowhere near as stormy as this kind of dark brooding light would indicate. If you look at the sea surface, you see it is quite ruffled, so it is quite breezy, but it certainly wasn't stormy, just rather cloudy with sunlight breaking through the breaks in the cloud. But by underexposing, not only have we accentuated the shaft of light, but we've also made this whole scene look quite stormy and brooding. All right, so now we're going to move on to backlighting. First, we're going to start with backlighting where the sun is not actually in the frame. It's out off the top of the picture somewhere, up at the top there somewhere, and out of the view. So not really getting into the shot, I'm glad to say. But of course, it still can be a problem in the sense that that can still create quite a few flares in your image, which can, as I say, make or break. Usually, in my view, usually breaks the picture, but sometimes it can make it. So two ways to help reduce or even overcome the problem of flares. Firstly, make sure your lens is really, really clean. Bits of dust and grease on the front of your lens, even small bits, will help to increase the rate of flares. And also a hood. The hood will really help to cut down the amount of flaring that breaks into the lens, especially if you're using a telephoto. Wide-angle lenses hoods don't work quite so well, but with a telephoto lens, it can be very effective. I should say there that actually I really hate carrying hoods around for most of my lenses. So what I use actually is my hand. I can never lose my hand, so I usually put my hand over the top of the lens and shade it that way, and that usually is very effective. Anyway, so with this particular shot, you can see it's early in the morning. We've got mist and dew on the grass. The sun is shining down from the top of the picture through that tree, and it wouldn't be particularly effective if it were not for the shadow of that tree. I think the shadow is really, really effective, cutting diagonally across the scene of the picture, giving us a little bit of energy and movement, dynamism. And then the beautiful halo around the fur of the sheep. I think that's a nice little extra touch. The main element certainly is the tree and its shadow, and then the light coming through from above the tree and then cutting through the tree and creating that shadow. But a nice secondary element is the halos around those sheep. Second shot on this kind of subject, with the sun not actually in the frame, but nevertheless counting as backlighting. The sun again is off the top here. I think actually it was over to the left here, off the top. This a view taken in Iceland just shortly before sunset. I'm not in the air. I'm standing on top of a cliff, looking along this beach, and as you can probably tell, it's a very windy evening, and all sorts of dust and sand are being kicked up by the wind, probably some spray as well. And the sun is shining through that dust and spray and really lighting it up, really sort of giving us a real nice, really picking it up and really giving us this very dramatic sense of a sandstorm, a spray storm, whatever it is. And then really in the distance as well, just really showing us a sense of the wind and a sense of the sand flying through the air. And I always really like this picture. I have not yet found very many people who agree with me, so I just keep on showing it to people until eventually people will agree with me that it's a great picture. But I think it's very atmospheric, very moody, and that's moody because of the sunlight shining through all this sand and spray that's flying through the air. Okay, so now we're going to move on to backlit images where the sun is visible in the frame. In this instance, the sun is up here at the top, lighting up a really nice woodland scene taken in April or May in East Devon. Nice bluebell wood. Firstly, I already said earlier that photographing in woodlands is usually best done on a day when it's cloudy and the light is nice and flat. This is the one kind of exception where I would say it works quite nicely when the sun is really low in the sky and you're able to shoot into the sunlight and you have the sun shining through the leaves and cutting across the ground like this. Then it can be really quite magical. Not always easy to get, but when you catch it and get it right, then it can be really beautiful. One thing to note, this is taken with an ND grad filter with the dividing line between the dark part and the clear part running through this area here, through where you can see sort of the ground meeting this bank, so that all the bluebell area is nicely lightened, and then all the trees and as well as the sky are darkened a little bit, so that we decrease the contrast range, so that we can show up nicely the bluebells and the trees and the sun shining through those trees. What you'll see in almost all the following pictures that show this have the sun very rarely do I have the sun really shining full force into the camera, because that really very often just overwhelms the camera, overwhelms the picture, and you're just asking for masses of flares and so on getting into the shot and just messing it up. I will usually try and find a way to diffuse the light, soften it, not exactly soften it, but diffuse it anyway, and break it up a bit and decrease its power. And that's what I've done here. It's got the sun partially hidden behind some branches of these trees. And if you do that and have a narrow lens aperture, f16 or something, then you get this beautiful starburst effect, which is just beautiful. I think when that works well, it really is quite special. So shooting in the light early in the morning, ND grad filter, and the sun partially diffused behind or partially hidden behind branches of the tree to actually decrease its impact in overall impact in the picture, and then creating a starburst as a result. The tropical equivalent, you might say, on a beach in the Philippines, towards the end of the day, the sun is sinking towards the horizon about an hour before sunset, and again I've hidden the sun behind behind the fronds of a palm tree. You can still see there's a nice starburst breaking through it, quite a small one, but it's there nevertheless, nice starburst. And it's also, although the trunk of the tree is almost infinite, not quite, the sun is lighting up the fronds of this particular palm really rather nicely and at the top of the picture as well. So you've got a really nicely lit picture with the sun backlighting the whole scene, but not overwhelming the picture because of it being partly hidden behind these palm fronds. And then we come on to the full-blown silhouette, where your subject is behind, where the sun is behind your subject, and your subject goes completely black. Now, the thing about a silhouette is it's made purely by the outline of the subject. If you've got a subject that is a solid black, a silhouette is not going to work. It's got to have a really great outline, very sort of dynamic and very broken up outline, you might say. So for example, this particular tree, monkey puzzle or araucaria tree, in its native environment in Patagonia, makes a great silhouette outline. And in this instance, early in the morning again, sun's quite low. We've actually managed to get two starbursts because the sun is behind this tree trunk, but the trunk is exactly the right thickness to actually have the sun breaking through on both sides of the trunk, which has given me two fantastic starbursts. So that's really the thing about silhouettes. Black, really interesting outline. The subject overall needs to be black with no detail. Otherwise, there's detail visible in the silhouette, then it really isn't a silhouette anymore. And generally speaking, silhouettes only work when the sun is quite low in the sky. If the sun is high, then silhouettes get weaker and weaker, and it doesn't really work. The subject kind of becomes grey rather than black. So use it when the sun is low, either early in the morning or late in the afternoon, early evening, whatever. And then we move on to an area, again, the sun is in the frame, but it's completely hidden behind this tower. This is on the summit of Glastonbury Tor in Somerset. And I could have done this in silhouette, but bearing in mind what I just said, this is a very big, solid structure. If it had been completely black, then it would really, I think, just be too much. It would be just a solid black blob dominating the scene. So I'll expose it in such a way to make sure that there was at least some detail visible in the picture. And I think a little bit of post-photography processing as well has actually further lined it a little bit, so we're not in complete silhouette. Obviously, these people are they're not quite in silhouette, but more or less. But that person there in the archway certainly is completely in silhouette. But the main subject, the building, is not totally in silhouette. And this is kind of raises the interesting thing about do you silhouette or do you not silhouette? In years gone by, when we were shooting with film, you had no choice. You shot in silhouette, and that's what you got was what you got. Nowadays, with fantastic post-photography processing and with sensors and lenses that can handle quite a lot of different kinds of light, we have the choice. We can decide whether to have a subject in silhouette or not very often. But with a lot of software now, we can actually break full detail out of some very, very deep shadows. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it always. If you want to have a silhouette, make sure your subject is a silhouette, i.e. black. Don't just have a silhouette and then put detail into your subject, because it's just going to look right. So you've got a great outline, great subject for the silhouette, shoot it in silhouette. Something else which wouldn't make a great silhouette, and try and have a bit of detail there so that you have the structure visible. This taken obviously, by the way, minutes before sunset. That's Yeah, and it's come out as a great, so I got a great, I was going to say silhouette there, but not silhouette, but almost a silhouette. Similar kind of idea here with this prehistoric burial chamber in the far west of Cornwall, taken just at sunrise, just the sun's coming over the horizon. Again, it's a have it wholly the silhouette would be just a massive black blob dominating the whole frame and really kind of spoiling it, really. So I've made sure to shoot it in a way that enables some of the detail in the rocks to be visible. Still have quite a big area of blackness here, but I think that's kind of okay because it's not taking up too much of the frame, and then a lot of the rest of the rock is visible with it, which is just works just quite well. Sun coming over the horizon here, we've got really quite a nice flare, almost a starburst coming out around the rocks, which is very effective and working extremely well. I don't remember if there were any sort of hexagons and pentagons and so on in the original shot coming up there, where I had to remove anything to actually make the image quite as perfect as it is. But it's certainly as this shot is, it's worked very well. And I say, wouldn't want to photograph this in total silhouette, but just like this, I think works really well. It's a sunrise. Now we get to the point where the sun is below the horizon. This is taken about half an hour after sunset, looking directly into the west sun, really looking into the light where the sun was, and it's really quite strong, quite bright still, even though it's already, say, 30 minutes after sunset. And we've got a partial silhouette here. The boardwalk on this river is the top of the boardwalk is nicely lit, got light coming from the sky and bouncing off it, and that's shown up. But the reflection of the boardwalk in the water is very much a silhouette. It's completely black, and that's showing up in silhouette. So that's kind of working in an interesting sort of way. It's kind of almost a rather complex image, but I think it works quite nicely. Looking westwards into the western sky after the sun has gone below the horizon, and using that glow to actually not only give mood and atmosphere to the picture, but also to light up the boardwalk as well. This has taken just actually a few minutes from my home and on the River Tean, and taken one very cold February evening. And then more of the same kind of thing now, except that we're not looking at the western sky now, I'm looking at the northern sky. The sun is set way off to the left here, and we're now about 30 or 40 minutes after sunset, and just shooting northwards, and the sky still has some nice color in it. It's much softer, partly because it's so long after sunset, but also because we're looking into the northern sky. Obviously, if I was to look to the west here, I wouldn't be able to photograph the lighthouse, but I would see much more red in the sky. But looking northwards, the red that's creeping into the sky there is a much softer, gentler, more pastel sort of color, I suppose. And that gives us a much gentler feel to the picture, with much softer, flatter, more even lighting across the whole scene. So shots taken, say, 30 or 40 minutes after sunset. So that actually reminds me to say, do not put your camera away the moment the sun goes below the horizon. I see that happen so many times with people out photographing, well, anywhere really. As soon as the sun sets, people put their cameras away and leave the scene. Well, that's actually, after the sun has set, that's really kind of just the beginning of what could be a great show. For the first 20 minutes or so, it can be a little bit dull, but then it really livens up and you end up with these nice shots like this one and like the previous one as well. Okay, moving on. So now we're looking at a scene. We're in a tropical dusk, and I'm looking eastward. So the sun is set behind me. So there's really no pink in the sky. If there's pink in the sky still, then it's behind me and not visible in this picture. As you may well know, of course, in the tropics, the sunset and dusk happen much, much more quickly. You can go from full sunlight through to complete darkness in less than 20 minutes. And so you've got to really be ready, pick your subject before the sun has set and be ready in position to actually get your shot. So in this instance, it's a boardwalk looking out over the water. So we're looking eastwards and got the moon just now rising over this other island across the other side of the bay there. And you can see the light is very flat, it's very even, other than the moon itself, of course. And it's lighting up the whole scene quite nicely. It's very blue, the water looks very blue, the sky looks very blue, because the light is really quite blue. We're now, as I say, the sun is well below the horizon, and we're in the time of reflected light. So reflected light is always rich in blue. There's very, very little, if any, red in reflected light because it just gets absorbed by the dust and water vapor in the air and just doesn't get anywhere, and you're left with just blue light. So that's what we end up with: nice flat evening light at dusk, and you end up with this kind of shot. Those with sharp eyes might notice this strange thing here. This is actually a heron, which just happened to be land there while I was in the middle of taking the shots. This is in the Maldives, by the way, this picture, and they have exactly the same species of heron as we have in Europe, but except that they are really very tame in Maldives. They will hang around hotels quite nicely. They'll even I've even seen them hanging around hotel swimming pools while they saw people using the pool. So they really don't really not that bothered about people, which is quite nice. So a good place to go to photograph herons if you want to do that. Anyway, so then flat lighting again after sunset, flat lighting after sunset on a fairly grey day anyway. So the light is completely flat and looks kind of greyish as well. There's not much blue because, well, this is, I guess because there's cloud and it's only the sun has, in this shot, the sun had only just set not that long before. So things haven't gone completely blue yet. So flat lighting really to sort of just evenly light up the wall and the water and give us a very atmospheric shot. Slow shutter speed is 2 seconds, helps exaggerate the storminess of the water. Actually, I'm taking away from lighting here for the moment, but it wasn't actually stormy at all. But with the slow shutter speed, it really makes it look kind of stormy and with waves crashing angrily against the wall. But it actually really wasn't quite like that at all. But we have quite a nice atmospheric lighting of atmospheric image, even though the lighting is very flat. And then flat lighting on a very rainy, well, not rainy, very dull, cloudy, yucky day. It's just a little bit blue because it really was such a dull day. And as you know, probably, I'm sure, photographing the sea on a very dull grey day is kind of problematic because you've got grey water, grey rocks, and grey sky. It's not really a great look. But again, I've used a slow shutter speed. I'm not sure how long this is, probably several seconds by the looks of it. It's blurred out that really ugly rippled water that you would get and given us a very ethereal, misty scene, which is quite complemented really by the soft, even lighting across the rocks. You have a nice light coming across the rocks, which is really showing up the ridges and crevices all over the place. And so it actually looks rather brighter than it actually was. But we've got some nice, so we've got a really nice three-dimensional sense of of these rocks, even though the lighting is very flat, and the whole thing is given mood and atmosphere by blurring out the movement of the water. And I think that's something that works very, very nicely. And then finally, waterfalls, going harking back to the two I showed you already. Another Icelandic waterfall. Again, just to say, most of the time, I prefer to photograph waterfalls in flat light under either in shade or under cloudy sky, or perhaps when the sun is below the horizon. It becomes a lot easier to shoot. White water like this will often burn out quite badly in bright sunlight. That shot I showed you earlier with the sun shining on the front of Kirkjufell's waterfall was quite lucky in the sense it didn't quite burn out, but very often it will. And it can really spoil the picture, not only there with the bright white water burning out, but also any dark volcanic rocks, dark rocks of any kind will go very, very black in bright sunlight. So you have this really strong contrast between the white burned out water and dark black rocks. So it can be a lot easier and a lot more productive to actually shoot in flat lighting, where sort of the exposure on the water and on the rocks is much more even. And you just use a slow shutter speed, put the camera on a tripod, and use a slow shutter speed and just blur it out. You have this lovely silken feeling of the water pouring down the cliffs. I should say I do sometimes photograph waterfalls in sunshine, as I've already shown you, and I do sometimes use the fast shutter speed. And there I could show you a few examples of those, but that's probably for another occasion, I suspect, to show you different ways of photographing waterfalls according to the light that gets thrown at you on particular days. And then continuing with flat light, woodland rivers and the woodland itself, I've already said, flat light is really the best way to photograph woodlands most of the time. It's also the best way to photograph fast flowing water like this. Again, white water in bright sunlight is going to burn out, same as with the waterfalls. So nice, and then also bright sunlight, of course, on the leaves, going to get bright highlights and deep shadows in under the trees. So it's going to be, would be quite a mess in sunshine. Much easier in nice, flat, even lighting. And you can really see the whole scene. Nice, beautifully green trees at the end of May. So when they've freshly leafed out, and nice flat lighting on the water, so these areas of white water not burned out, and it's still retaining all their detail and looking pretty effective. Similarly, again in the middle of woodland, again bright sunlight would really make a mess of this picture. Best really to have nice even lighting. So it shows up bluebells, shows up the foliage in the trees, shows up the tree trunks. Everything is evenly lit, and you really have a nice even lighting across the whole thing. Taken in May, I believe. It's in a place called Longwood, which is at the top end, the northern end of Cheddar Gorge. It's one of the places we're quite likely to go to during my Mendips photo workshop in next May. Okay, then one quick shot of garden photography. Again, garden photography is usually best done in flat lighting under a cloudy sky. It's sometimes you get some great shots in gardens with sunlight, but mostly you still have, it's similar to photographing in woodland. You have a mixture of bright highlights and deep shadows, which really break up the composition, and it just doesn't work terribly well. Very often, it's a lot better to photograph under a cloudy sky, perhaps sometimes a bright cloudy sky, but cloudy nevertheless. So you've got this nice even lighting. Another thing I should say here, this shot and all the quite a few of the previous flat lighting shots, you might have noticed that we've got no sky. I will very often mask out the sky, because on a cloudy day, even when the sky is cloudy, it's still a lot brighter than the landscape, and it's very hard to reconcile the two in terms of exposure. The sky will be way too bright, the landscape will be way too dark for the digital sensor to be able to handle, even if you use an ND grad filter. Sometimes it works, and I'll show you that in a moment, but quite often that sky is too bright to darken sufficiently even with an ND grad filter. So very often I will mask out or crop out, frame out, I should say, the sky if I possibly can, so we can concentrate on the landscape component of the scene. All right, then fog. Fog is a fantastic subject, or fantastic form of lighting, I suppose, to actually photograph certain subjects, not everything, but subjects get reduced to their minimal sort of structure, you might say, outlines and shape, rather than detail. A lot of the detail gets lost, the clutter gets removed, especially if you've got snow on the ground, as well as we have in this shot. And it's in many ways it's kind of an interesting thing, because as you see in this shot, I've got a lot of sky in the picture, and it's serving as quite a very bright, translucent screen, I suppose you might say, against which to light up our subject. It's almost like backlighting, except it's not quite. And actually, the original picture that I took, it's quite dull and gloomy, because the sky is actually not this bright at all. This brightness is the result of post-photography processing to really brighten things up a bit. So it's not actually, certainly this shot anyway, is not backlighting. Sometimes it can be, but this shot is not backlighting because the sky was really quite dull. But nevertheless, you're photographing this against this really nice translucent canvas, which is diffusing, filtering the light coming down onto your subject. You end up with very simple, very nice, nicely exposed pictures with nice, generally speaking, even lighting. Similar kind of idea in a tropical rainforest in the Philippines. Thick fog. I'm standing on the forest floor, pointing the camera up at the canopy, just after a big bank of fog had descended on me. And I found it a lot easier to photograph the forest in this fog than I did in clear, cloudy conditions. It was just too complicated and too messy and too cluttered. When the fog came down, it all became much simpler. A lot of the detail was lost. And I found I was able to point up at the canopy like this and get some really great shots. And I think this one, it's still busy, still cluttered. We've got a big area of black over here, which is a little bit disconcerting. But I think this outline of this tree fern here is actually very strong and really dominates the frame and actually works as a subject very well. This is an idea where you might say that this is backlighting, you might say, because it's the tree fern is almost in silhouette, not quite. You still see that it's a bit green. You still see some detail there. Um, but so I'm not sure that I would call this backlighting. It's really very soft, even lighting against the sky. Again, using the sky as a sort of a diffuse canvas, or a sheet of canvas that's diffusing the light coming down onto my subject. And then finally, those instances where shooting on a cloudy day with the sky in the frame really does work. And it's a situation where you need to have an ND grad filter, and you also need to have some interesting patterns in the cloud. If you just had a flat, even grey sky, then using an ND grad filter will darken the sky, of course, but it won't actually make it any more interesting. But if you have patterns in the cloud patterns in the sky, then using an ND grad filter will really greatly help the whole scene and really make it much more dramatic. The ND grad filter, of course, will darken that sky, make it more visible, and it will lighten the landscape components of the picture, and it will greatly reduce the contrast range. If you shoot it without an ND grad filter, you'll all be familiar with the result. You'll end up with a picture where either your landscape is correctly exposed, but the sky is completely burned out, and you can't, or not completely burned out necessarily, but you can't see any detail in it. You can't really see the clouds there. Or you got the sky correctly exposed and the landscape is horribly dark and just doesn't really work at all well. Put an ND grad filter in, and with a dividing line between grey and clear running along the horizon here. Obviously, it's a little bit of a hit and miss kind of thing. I think I may have run it along this line actually, so too long there. But anyway, a little bit, you're approximating really, but nevertheless, you are overall having a really dramatic effect on the sky and lightening the landscape quite nicely, so you end up with a picture that really works well. So I can thoroughly recommend using an ND grad filter on cloudy days, most especially when you've got clouds where there are patterns in that cloud. And it's also enhanced by using a wide angle lens, so you enhance and exaggerate these diagonals both in the clouds and in the rocks and even in the grasses as well. And that works really quite nicely. So that really is the final shot in the talk. Just the usual stuff at the end. Just to have my nice picture of some of the books I have available. And then also just a reminder that you can get 15% discount off almost everything on the website at the moment if you use this coupon code autumn23_special15. Sorry, it's a bit complicated. Use that when you get to checkout when you're buying, and you'll get 15% off, but that's only until the 10th of December. So you have a few days left in which to use it. I say almost everything, but it's not, you can't use it for the Rosemore garden photography course, because that is run by, and the price is set by Rosemore, not by me. So that's that one is exempt from this area. Workshops for all of 2024 are now listed on my website, and they're all bookable except one, which is the very last one, a wildlife photography course in November. I'm changing the venue, hoping to be able to do a wildlife course around the estuary of the River Exe. But I'm just still working on what photo locations to use. So I haven't put that one as bookable yet because I'm not sure that I'm going to get the right locations I want. But I'm working on that one. And then next photography tour, I'm restarting photography tours, whoopee, at long last. And the first one's going to be in West Cornwall. It's called Wild West Cornwall, the very western toe of Cornwall, west of St Ives and Penzance, right out to the end, at Land's End and so on. That's now on the website, and all the details are there, and it's bookable, and it's going to run the 3rd to the 8th of November. So it's 5 nights. I'm just trying to finalize details with the hotels at the moment. So they're not actually on the site as yet, but just trying to dot a few I's and cross a few T's with the hotels, but everything else is there. And at the moment, if you book it, you would just pay the deposit at the moment, and with the deposit, you just get the 15% discount off that until the 10th of December. If you wanted to sign up, I would be delighted, of course, if you would. It's going to be a very small group, only 4 people maximum, so it's kind of a little bit exclusive. Ensures that we don't have to have too big a vehicle, don't have too many people. You can have my attention almost the whole time, etc. And it should be a lot of fun, assuming the weather cooperates, of course. And finally, the next talk will be on Wednesday, 20th of March, 8 p.m. I haven't actually decided what the subject would be as yet. Perhaps I should talk about waterfalls. That's a subject dear to my heart. We could talk about that. I could talk about that endlessly. Yeah. So, but if you have subject you'd like to suggest, then please do so. I'll sort of nail it down to what I'm actually going to talk about fairly soon. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then if you have any questions, please turn your microphone on and ask away. That would be great. So we can stop sharing now, and there we are. If you turn your camera on, then bear in mind that you will be visible in the recording that will go on to YouTube later. So you might prefer just to have your microphone on, but that's entirely up to you. Okay. Right. Any questions from anybody? Everybody's fallen asleep, or you've all I've bamboozled you all.
No, one thing from me, Nigel, David.
David, hi. Yeah.
It's just a question about your ND filters.
Okay.
I know there are several brands out there on the market, and
Yes, there are.
you're unlikely to tell me which is the best. But is it a case of just horses for courses?
Yeah. Well, I think there are certain ones. I'm not going to name any brands, which are probably a bit overpriced because they have the name and the reputation. And then there are others that are probably a bit too cheap. So somewhere in the middle, really.
Yeah.
They're not cheap things. That's certainly good ones are not cheap things. And you will make sure you can buy them in different sizes. You will need to make sure you get the right size for your lenses. So you will need to do a little bit of research first, just to make sure you're buying the right width. They're all fairly long, so you can slide them up and down in the mount that goes on the front of your lens, but they need to be the right width for your lens, especially if you're using them with really wide angle lenses, because you don't want to go catching the edge of the filter in vision in the wide angle lens.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Nigel. It's Mandy.
Hi, Mandy.
I know we've spoken about this before, and I can't remember what you've said, but could you recommend, would it be better to get a soft or hard for ND grad? You know, where the transition is either, a softer or harder line or edge?
Yeah, it's a tricky one actually, because it does take a little bit of practice to get used to using them. And I know when I first started using ND grad filters many years ago, I did find it easier to use a soft ND grad filter, even when I was photographing something with a hard horizon, such as the sea. I find it a little easier. But of course, when you start looking at things more closely, when you go a soft ND grad filter, then it will never quite line up with your horizon. So it doesn't work quite right. So once you've got used to using ND grad filters, it's probably best to have a hard ND grad filter for subjects that have a hard horizon, like the sea, for example. Yeah. And then you'll be able to line it up quite accurately. And once you've got used to using them, initially you struggle to even see the dividing line when you're looking through the lens, trying to see where the separation line is between the dark area and the clear area. But right. Practice makes perfect, I suppose, and it just becomes second nature after a while, being able to watch where that line is as you slide the filter up and down and try and line it up with the horizon. Okay. So in the end, it's better to have a hard ND grad filter, but you might find it easier initially to start experimenting with soft ND grads.
Yeah. Okay. Get a soft grad to start with, and then, like you say, once you're used to using it, then you could then purchase another.
Yeah, possibly that was my experience anyway. Obviously, if you're feeling bold and brave and confident, then go straight for the hard ND grad filter, but you might be a little bit disappointed with your initial results. That's the only thing.
Okay, right. No, fair point. Yeah, it is trial and error, isn't it, with a lot of these things?
Yes, well, there's certainly quite a bit of experimentation and practice.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Nigel. That's helpful.
You're very welcome. No problem. Anybody else? Somebody groaning, so I can hear. No, okay. Well, if there are no more questions, then I'll sort of sign off. And I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I'll hopefully see you next time, and see you at a workshop or some event next year. And also let me this is the first time I've done it. I hope you all have a great Christmas. This is the first time I wished anybody a happy Christmas. So I hope you all have a happy Christmas and a great New Year, and we'll see you in 2024, already 2024. I can't believe it. What happened? Okay, so good night, everybody, and see you next year. Thank you very much.